February 1945, Birmingham, England. Inside 6 warehouse hangars, millions of letters and packages destined for American servicemen in Europe had piled up. Some had been sitting there for 2 or 3 years. Letters from mothers to sons, photographs of newborn children, Christmas packages with long-spoiled food, all of it attracting rats and covered in mold. 7 million American soldiers scattered across the European theater of operations were waiting for news from home. Military command understood that lack of communication with family destroyed army morale just as effectively as enemy attacks. A soldier could endure bombings and hardship, but months without letters broke them psychologically. The problem seemed unsolvable. How do you find a specific addressee among millions? More than 7,000 soldiers bore the name Robert Smith. Many letters were addressed simply to Junior, U.S. Army. Soldiers were constantly transferred between units. Address cards weren't updated. Some addressees had already been killed, but information about this hadn't yet reached postal services. Army specialists calculated that sorting through this backlog would take at least 6 months, possibly longer. But they weren't accounting for one thing. In December 1944, a decision was made to send the first all-African-American women's battalion to Europe. 855 women were about to solve a problem that had gone unsolved for months. 1940s America lived under racial segregation. African Americans couldn't attend the same schools as whites, sit on the same buses, or use the same public facilities. Yet the country was fighting Nazi Germany under banners of freedom and equality. In 1942, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was created. For the first time, women could serve in the Army in roles beyond nursing. However, strict quotas applied to African American women. They were accepted in limited numbers, placed in segregated units, and not sent overseas. Charity Adams was born in 1918 to a Methodist minister and teacher in North Carolina. She graduated at the top of her class, earned a university education in mathematical and physics from Wilberforce University in Ohio. After graduation, she worked as a teacher in South Carolina. In the summer of 1942, she received an invitation for training in the first officer class of the new Women's Army Corps. In July, she arrived at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. Despite segregated training conditions, she showed excellent results. In August 1942, Adams received the rank of second lieutenant, becoming one of the first African American women officers in the American military. For the next 2 years, she served as an instructor at Fort Des Moines, commanding a company of 2 white platoons and 1 black platoon. In 1943, she was promoted to major. At 25 years old, she became one of the highest-ranking women officers in the country. Meanwhile, in Washington, activist Mary McLull Bethune was campaigning to send African-American women overseas. She appealed to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and the War Department. Her argument was simple. If black women were good enough to serve in the Army, they were good enough to serve abroad. By the end of 1944, the postal problem in Europe had reached a critical point. The War Department decided to create an African-American women's battalion to handle the mail. If they succeeded, problem solved. If not, no one really expected much from them anyway. In December 1944, Major Charity Adams was given command of a new unit, the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. 855 women, predominantly African American, though among them were Puerto Ricans and Mexican Americans. This was the only all-black women's unit sent to Europe during the war. Volunteer recruitment was successful. Hundreds of women wanted to serve overseas. They came from different states, teachers, secretaries, students. At Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, they underwent intensive training, physical exercises, learning to work with gas masks, ship disembarkation procedures, basics of military discipline. No one told them the exact destination or nature of the mission. On February 3, 1945, approximately 700 women of the battalion's first wave sailed from New York aboard the SS Ile-de-France. The former luxury liner had been converted into military transport. The journey across the Atlantic in winter was dangerous. German submarines continued patrolling these waters. The ship moved in zigzags, maintaining blackout protocols. After 12 days at sea, the ship arrived in Glasgow, Scotland on February 11th. Major Adams and her staff met the arrivals at the docks. By train, the women traveled to Birmingham, England, where they were housed in the former King Edward School building in the Edgbaston district. The building had been requisitioned for military purposes back in 1939. Housing conditions were segregated. Black women lived and ate separately from white service members. 32 officers were housed in 3 homes across from the school. The rest stayed in school facilities. The day after arrival, the women saw the scope of work ahead. 6 warehouse hangars were filled with mail from floor to ceiling. Millions of letters and packages in complete disarray. Many food packages had spoiled, attracting rodents. The facilities were unheated. Windows were painted black according to blackout requirements for protection from night bombings. The main difficulty wasn't the volume, but the chaos of addressing. More than 7,500 servicemen bore the name Robert Smith. Many letters had incomplete or outdated addresses. Soldiers constantly moved between units. Their address cards weren't always updated in time. Some addressees had already been killed. Army Command estimated the work at 6 months. Major Adams set a goal for the battalion: to finish faster. The battalion was organized along military principles. 5 companies, headquarters and 4 postal companies, A, B, C, D. Most women worked as postal clerks, others as cooks, mechanics, support personnel. The battalion was self-sufficient. It had its own mess hall, motor pool, warehouses, military police, chapel, and newsletter. Work was organized in 3 8-hour shifts, 7 days a week. The hangars operated around the clock. A third of the battalion worked, a third rested, a third slept. Shifts rotated regularly. To avoid freezing in unheated facilities, women wore additional clothing: ski pants under uniforms, field jackets, gloves. Working in low-light conditions quickly led to eye fatigue. The battalion created a card catalog system for 7 million service members. Cards required constant updating. Information about transfers, wounds, deaths arrived regularly. The women developed a system of cross-checks to locate addressees. The work required knowledge of Army structure, unit numbering systems, theater of operations geography. With incomplete addresses, they used any available data: sender's handwriting, return address city, details mentioned in letters. The women learned to work like detectives, reconstructing information from fragments. Accuracy was critical. One mistake in the card catalog could lead to hundreds of letters being sent to the wrong place. The work required a watchmaker's concentration and an assembly line worker's speed. The battalion was under constant observation. Local residents came to see black women in American uniforms. White American soldiers checked the quality of work. Generals regularly demanded progress reports. The women understood the significance of their work. They weren't just processing paper, but the connection between soldiers and their families. Letters contained news of births, deaths, declarations of love. Proper delivery determined the morale of millions of service members. Gradually, the volume of unprocessed mail began to shrink. The women perfected their methods, increased their speed. On average, the battalion processed about 65,000 pieces of mail per day. Beyond working with mail, the women had to face racial discrimination. The American Red Cross offered to house the battalion's women in a separate hotel in London. Major Adams recognized the attempted segregation and categorically refused. She declared that as long as she commanded the battalion, not one of her subordinates would stay in a segregated establishment. A local servicemen's club accepted black men, but refused black women. Instead of accepting these conditions, the battalion organized its own recreation facilities: a dining hall, barbershop, canteen. The most serious incident occurred with a visit from a general who wasn't in the battalion's chain of command. He demanded a full formation of all women for inspection. Major Adams only had 300 women ready. The rest were on duty or resting after shifts. The general insisted on full formation. Major Adams refused to disrupt the battalion's work schedule for a show inspection. Her response became legendary. The general tried to initiate a court-martial but couldn't, since technically he wasn't her commander, and his demand was unreasonable. Several months later, in France, the same general acknowledged the battalion's achievements and changed his attitude. He told Major Adams that working with her had been an educational experience for him. White soldiers spread negative rumors about the battalion's women, trying to undermine their reputation. This was a manifestation of resentment that black women were allowed to serve overseas. The battalion ignored these provocations and focused on work. Major Adams encouraged her subordinates to interact with white soldiers and local population. She understood that personal communication destroyed prejudices more effectively than orders. English residents proved more hospitable than American military personnel, often inviting women to visit and attend local events. By the end of March 1945, it became clear that the battalion was succeeding. The work pace increased, methods improved. The card catalog worked efficiently. Mail was delivered to addressees regularly. On May 8, 1945, Germany capitulated. This was Victory in Europe Day. However, for the battalion, the work didn't end. The volume of mail actually increased. Soldiers wrote home en masse about the victory, and their families sent congratulations. By May 1945, 3 months after starting work, the battalion had completely cleared the postal backlog in Birmingham. All millions of letters and packages were either delivered to addressees, returned to senders, or marked as undeliverable. The task calculated for 6 months was completed in 3. In June 1945, the battalion was relocated to Rouen, France. There, a 3-year backlog had accumulated. The women were housed in old French barracks. In Rouen, they participated in a parade honoring Joan of Arc. Work in Rouen took 5 months. By October, the 3-year accumulation was processed. In August, the war in the Pacific ended. Japan capitulated. In October 1945, the battalion was transferred to Paris. By this time, the unit's size began to shrink. 300 women were demobilized while still in France. Another 200 were discharged in January 1946. In February 1946, the remaining battalion members returned to the United States, to Fort Dix, New Jersey. There was no ceremonial welcome. The battalion was disbanded immediately upon arrival. The women dispersed to their homes in different parts of the country. The lack of recognition was typical for African American veterans of that time. The country didn't want to draw attention to black service members' contribution to victory. This created uncomfortable questions about racial inequality within the country. After the war, Charity Adams, who had received the rank of lieutenant colonel, returned to her studies. She earned a master's degree in psychology from Ohio State University. In 1949, she married veteran physician Stanley Early. They had 2 children. The family settled in Dayton, Ohio, where Charity engaged in community activities, including work on school desegregation. Other battalion women continued their education, built careers, started families. Many participated in the civil rights movement of the 1950s to 60s. The battalion's history gradually faded from memory. Textbooks didn't mention their service. War documentaries ignored their contribution. However, the women themselves maintained connections, met at reunions, and passed their history to children and grandchildren. In 1989, Charity Adams Early published her memoir, One Woman's Army, where she described in detail her service experience. In January 2002, Charity Adams Early died at age 83. Gradually, the battalion's story began to attract attention. In 1981, several veterans returned to Birmingham, where the city's mayor held a ceremony in their honor. This was the first public recognition 36 years after the war. In 2009, a ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. President Obama honored the battalion's veterans. In 2018, a monument was unveiled at Fort Leavenworth honoring the 6888 Battalion with a bronze bust of Charity Adams. In 2019, a documentary about the battalion was released. The U.S. Army awarded the unit a Meritorious Unit Commendation. The surviving veterans became Grand Marshals at the Memorial Day Parade. In March 2022, President Joe Biden signed legislation awarding members of the 6888 Battalion the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor in the United States. By 2025, only one veteran remained alive, Fannie McClendon. Fort Lee in Virginia was renamed Fort Gregg Adams in honor of Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams Early. In December 2024, the Netflix film The 6888 was released, bringing the battalion's story to a wide audience. The story of the 6,888th Battalion is important not only as a military episode, but as a social phenomenon. These women fought a double battle, against fascism in Europe and against racism in their own country. Their service demonstrated the competence of African American women at a time when society systematically denied their abilities. They completed the task in half the allotted time, working in difficult conditions and under constant skeptical observation. The experience of African American service members in World War II accelerated the civil rights movement. Veterans returned with an understanding that racial segregation was not inevitable. In 1948, President Truman issued an order desegregating the armed forces, a direct result of pressure from black veterans. The women of the 6,888th opened the path for the next generations of African American women in the military. They proved the possibility of successful service by women overseas and in complex logistical roles. Today, African American women serve at all levels of the U.S. Armed Forces. Each of them continues the tradition begun by the women of the 6,888th Battalion. The battalion's history reminds us how much talent was wasted due to systemic discrimination. It also demonstrates people's ability to overcome obstacles when given opportunity and support. The battalion's motto, "No male, low morale," reflected an understanding of the importance of human connections, even in wartime conditions. These 855 women maintained the morale of 7 million service members by ensuring their connection with home. Their story is about service, dignity, and the fight for equality under conditions of systemic injustice.